everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm very excited about today's discussion, contingency planning at events, what to do when things go wrong. I'm Cassie. I'm the director of marketing at Expo Pass, and I'm going to be your moderator today for this conversation. If you're not familiar with Expo Pass, we're an event technology platform designed for organizers like you. Our platform offers a range of tools that enables you to seamlessly plan, track, and host events of all kinds. We have all sorts of tools to make your life as an organizer easy, from on-demand badge printing to lead retrieval and a lot more. If you're interested to learn more, feel free to check it out. We will drop the link in the chat in just a little bit. Before we kick off the event, there's just a quick few things I'd like to go over. Today's event is all about fostering a discussion, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. So please feel free to use the chat and fire away your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them as the conversation goes. In the chat, you'll see a person named Lauren there. She is on the Expo Pass marketing team, and she'll be there to help answer some questions along the way. This session is being recorded, so it will be available to you to watch on demand later today. And all attendees who are seeking CECs will earn 1 continuing education hour through the Events Industry Council for attending this event. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk about why you should always have a contingency plan in your back pocket. Events can be full of surprises, no matter how well you plan them. Sometimes unexpected challenges can just pop out of nowhere, and as you mostly know, that happens at events all the time. And that's why we're here. We're going to help you navigate those tricky situations like a pro. Today, we'll share some practical strategies, get some great tips, hear some real life stories, and prepare you for those curveballs that might come your way. So today we have 2 event pros with us, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson. They're both joining us, and together they host an awesome podcast called Better Events Podcast. Their podcast, you'll learn about event strategy and actions that you can use as an event host, planner, or manager. They are now on season 3, which is amazing. And there's just so much great information shared there. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's an absolute go-to resource for event organizers. And we will also add that link in the chat for you to check out as well. So just a little bit more background on each of the speakers. I'd like to officially introduce Logan. She is owner of Logan Strategy Group and excels at in-person and virtual event planning and project management. She's worked with agencies, professional sports teams, brands, startups, non-for-profits, all sorts of people all around the world. Over the last few years, she's managed over 120 speakers for a virtual conference, produced sports presentation at the Tokyo Olympics, webinars, workshops, you name it, she's done it. Logan, thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. And then we also have Mary joining us as well. Mary is owner of EP Events, and she leads the EP Events team in nonprofit, community, and corporate events for virtual, hybrid, and in-person events. Her years of fundraising experience have led her to dive deep into the world of events and help non-for-profits raise funds for their cause. Purposeful events are her jam, and she's known for event planning on a budget and working efficiently and effectively. She's also the co-founder of Event Pros on the Go retreat and enjoys giving back to the event industry. Really excited to have you both here, and let's just start diving into this discussion and learn about contingency plans. So to kick us off here, what are contingency plans and why are they even so important?
Great question. Great way to start. And just thanks everybody for joining us today. We're really excited to be with you, especially in this live format. We're used to doing like recorded things. And so this is different and it's fun. But yeah, contingency planning is an important topic. It's sometimes viewed as like a doomsday conversation, which is kind of fun to think of it that way, I think, but we're not like manifesting anything bad. Basically, we just are going to talk about real things that could happen in an event. We're not going to talk about, a zombie apocalypse or anything like that. We're going to keep it real. But we're going to hope to kind of talk through like tips and tricks and some scenario examples and just learn lessons from each other today. So we're excited to see you interact in the chat, like Cassie said. And so to answer your question, contingency plans, just to start at the beginning, they're important for a lot of reasons, but basically they're your backup plan. They're your plan B, basically a plan that you can use to react appropriately when things don't go according to plan, which is very common and often in events. But overall, I like to view them as a plan to be proactive rather than reactive. And so those look a lot of different ways and they encompass a lot of different things, but that's kind of like a basic thing that I will say. And I'll pass it over to Logan to add on to that.
Yeah, just to echo what Mary said, Cassie, thank you for having us here. Thank you, Expo Pass. And I'm loving all the places that people are coming to us from the chat. And Gabriel, glad to hear you've listened to the podcast for a while. So, Mary, I'm going to steal something that you've done on our podcast a couple of times, which you love to Google terms to really be broad. So if you just Google what is a contingency plan, you're going to get a plan designed to take a possible future event or circumstance into account. And so I think, Mary, you also nailed it, but I am really passionate about backup plans, contingency plans. You will, if you work with me, know that I love to talk about these different scenarios, not because I want them to happen, but because I'm such a firm believer that if we talk about it, we are then better prepared for if that happens, versus if you don't talk about it and then something goes wrong, you're going to waste some precious minutes or even hours trying to figure out how to fix it in that moment, versus if you've already talked about how to deal with a scenario, you're going to be able to react that much faster, which in the event world, so much of what we do is how we handle those scenarios. I'm sure there's some planners here who do wish to just work events that always go perfectly according to plan. But there might be a couple of you guys who agree with me where sometimes we really get to shine as event pros when things don't go according to plan, because that's when we really get to utilize the tools and our experience. And so it's not like I wish things to go wrong, but I know when I reflect back on events, some of my proudest moments are how I've reacted to those challenging situations. So contingency plans is just putting down the framework for any element of your event, especially if you're the organizer overseeing the whole event. You need a very comprehensive contingency plan. If maybe you're only responsible for a portion of it, like say you're a vendor who maybe is just in charge of the food, or maybe you're just flowers, or you're the venue, there's very specific backup plans you need. So I feel like we're going to touch on specific ones, but no, they don't always apply to you. But this is a good time also to sit here and reflect on the different parts of what you're responsible and for an event, and make sure you've thought through, like, what if that runs late? What if I don't have enough? What if, something cancels on me last minute? And again, applying it to your specific situation.
Absolutely. That is so much great stuff just to start us off. And as you said, we're going to dive deeper into some of those topics. One thing that you said there about just how you need to talk about it and have a plan. I know from my own experience in other roles at other companies where I've been part of event planning, when you try to, with some teams, talk about like, oh, should we plan for this? Some people are like, no, don't think about that. You're going to jinx us. But you have to talk through it. That's the only way you can just have everything how you need it to be. I am going to go ahead and put a poll question here. We would just love to get an idea for our audience where you are all at with your contingency plans to help steer the direction of our conversation a bit. So I'm going to put a poll up right now that is asking you, how confident are you in your current contingency plan? And let's see, while I get that poll up too, I'm going to throw out the next question for our speakers, which is, who needs to know your contingency plan? Who are the people that you need to discuss this with and that you need to have on speed dial?
Yeah, I think that a common issue with contingency planning is that it does get put on the back burner, and whether it's because people like that they don't want to talk about it, or just there's other things going on. I think a lot of times we're focused on like the here and now and like what we're dealing with, and we don't want to or don't have time really to think about like what could go wrong. I think that's like reality a lot of the times when we're planning an event. So what helps is getting a lot of people on board with this idea so that they can help you troubleshoot when it comes down to needing to enact it. And so I would say that the event manager is the person who really needs to be prepared with these backup plans. I would say it's kind of their job to make sure that this is a conversation that happens. Because in many cases, they are the ones that are going to have to be troubleshooting that night. But I would say contingency planning is most successful when the key event partners are also aware of these plans, so that they can react appropriately as well if something happens. And so that could be like the event team, an event like co-chair if there's a committee that's involved in the planning, like the client lead or the company lead that you've been working with, or maybe it's like your manager if you do work for a company. The venue, I would say, and venues often have their own plans, which is maybe a further conversation later on. And then vendors as well, at least certain vendors, depending on what their role is. And so you may be listening to this and you might have years of event experience, but you really need to be able to empower people with the backup plans to best mitigate problems when they do arise. And so I would say communicating it to a lot of those key players that I just mentioned is really going to help those be successful.
Yeah, I think to add to that, it would just be anyone that gets affected by that backup plan. Because I feel like sometimes as if you're especially the organizer, the event manager, you're the lead at top, if you know the backup plans, but no one else does, you've kind of missed a crucial step, because then you're still going to take time when something goes wrong to then communicate that down. So for like an example, I guess would be if you, for this webinar, let's say if our Zoom link hadn't worked, a backup plan would have been to have a backup Zoom link, but then also probably the email drafted to everybody who'd registered for our event, already drafted. So all it has to do is hit send. So we'd probably have to include, the marketing team at Expo Pass on that as well, or the email manager at least, and making sure we're all aware and exactly when that call would be made and who is making that call to say, yep, we're not going to use the original link. We're moving to a new platform. So making sure everybody involved knows it is really important. And that also impacts if you're someone who plans maybe outdoor events, larger scale events. When I do sporting events, you'll notice if you go to an arena and you bought a ticket for the actual like baseball game and you're going to the baseball game as a fan, they will put up their evacuation plan, especially if you get to the game early. They try to usually get it out of the way, but they will actually have a PA read and a big graphic up there telling you exactly, in the case of emergencies, here's how to get out of the arena. And that's like a requirement. They have to do that because that's an example of when we say communicate it, because in the case of an emergency and evacuation, your attendees do need to know that information, not just your event staff. So it's something just to think through, that you want to make sure everybody involved who has a crucial part in like reacting to whatever emergency you're planning for knows what is expected of them. I'm not telling to tell your attendees all of your backup plans, just the ones for that kind of physical safety. It's important to let them know that. Or to Mary's point about a venue, if you have a rain plan, making sure you actually talk to the venue about that to make sure it's actually feasible, and you can actually execute it, versus you and your planning team being like, we have the plan, but we're not going to tell anybody else. So it's very much a team activity for contingency planning, and you can get as niche as you want or just have some really broad strokes contingency plans.
I just took a couple tips and notes for my next webinar there for some contingency plans you gave me. So thought of a couple and some were definitely new. So thank you for that. And what you were both saying kind of feeds into our next question too about communication. That's definitely key as an event organizer. So you talked a bit about communicating with your team and you did a bit about attendees, but what is the best way to effectively communicate with your attendees when there is some type of change, whether it's a speaker changing or maybe something's in a different room or something more important like weather? How can you communicate with them best?
You got
You
it,
go ahead.
Logan.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was going to say, you go, Mary. I feel like, having emails actually drafted, if a part of your plan involves an app notification, an email notification, a social media blast, or maybe even a host, your MC on stage making announcement, having that stuff pre-drafted so it's there and you just have to pick it up. So actually drafting the email, Mary and I worked an event that was involving a small group, was streaming. We had a lot of people in the room physically, but we also had a virtual audience, and we took the time to make a backup link, draft that email, have all the attendees who were virtual joining us like in the send, the 2-column, and all it would be is like, if we're making that call, Mary would let me know, we'd move to the new link, and she'd let the marketing person know to send that email. And we'd gone that far down that rabbit hole, knowing post-event nothing went wrong. We were able to use the original link. They got dissatisfied just to like delete that email, but it was ready. So I think actually physically drafting any communication that you need, and you can template this if you're someone who hosts a number of events or it's an annual event, so you don't have to recreate it every single time. Another example, like I have, if I do virtual events, I always have a slide that says, we'll be right back. It is my lucky rabbit's foot, I call it, to clients who kind of blanch a little bit of like, why do we need, and they can make a pun. It can be funny. I had a pool themed corporate event that said like, the pool's closed for maintenance, we'll be back shortly, as their slide. But the idea is you have it, and because you have it, you won't have to use it. And we would talk through scenarios of, okay, when would you want us to put this up? Do we just immediately do it because we sense something's going wrong, or do we have to wait for someone to approve, say, yes, please put up the backup slide? And ever since I've instituted this, I'd say in the last, I'm going to knock on all the wood right now, like 3-4 years that I've had to do this, I haven't had to use it, but I've always had it. And it's forever going to be on my list to have a we'll be right back slide for any virtual element.
It's a great tip.
Just to add on to that a little bit, I would say for emailing specifically is a great thing to kind of pre-draft. And so I would say like it's great to have some pre-drafted, like approved emails, approved from whoever it is that needs to approve communications before they get sent out typically. So whether that's, an event organizer that's sending it or the organization itself that's sending it, but just like a mass email ready to go, acknowledging something, like something that could go wrong, just kind of acknowledging an issue, and you can fill it in. But I think sometimes the issue is that if something does go wrong in a way that it needs to be acknowledged in that type of setting, is that we're often like reactionary. And so maybe it's not as eloquent as it could be or something like that. So just to kind of pre-draft it and be ready to send that email that could include things like we're canceling the event. It could include things like someone said something that's inappropriate and we don't stand for that. And like just, things like that. I would say those are the most common scenarios that you might need to send an email like that, but just to have that pre-baked and ready to send is another tip there.
Absolutely. I say, and
And
from, oh,
sorry,
go
just
ahead,
to drill
Logan.
on one thing Mary mentioned, which I thought was so important, is it is important to acknowledge things that your attendees are going to notice it. You do want to acknowledge it. I feel like the anecdotes or the stories I hear from other event pros of like when things go wrong and they are memorably wrong, it's often how the organizer reacts to it. So not acknowledging that, there was really long lines at registration and that was really frustrating for everyone when they came in. There's a way to kind of communicate that out, whether it's you can take the humorous response of like, don't worry, but we're keeping the coffee open later for you, or something as an app push, like, thanks for your patience. Our main stage is going to start about 10 minutes later and the coffee is going to keep pouring all day or something, versus just ignoring it and acting like it didn't happen. And that's just one example. But just knowing that like usually your attendees are going to be pretty forgiving in the in-person world, in the virtual world, as long as you kind of own up to it and then, figure out how you're going to move forward.
Absolutely. And we have several attendees in our chat. Thank you all for joining in that, who are definitely agreeing with backup slides, getting speaker presentations ahead of time, and just saving a lot of stress there. Couldn't agree more. I would also say I have to add from the event technology side too, an event app can definitely help you if there's like a change of plans. You can update the agenda or send a push notification with whatever your message is. So that's definitely a handy tool to get things out to the attendees. Let's see, we have finished our poll here. Thank you all for participating. And looks like you guys are pretty awesome with some plans. We have about 50% who are somewhat confident in their plan, about 15% who are very confident, and then not that many, but a few who need some help. But that's why we're here. And I say, let's share those results there so everyone can take a look. While you're looking at that as well, we are getting a few Q&A questions. And keep those coming. One of them we have from Karen. Could you provide some pointers on how you would train event staff to handle unexpected incidents without getting flustered or needing to ask for help? Well, that's a good one. If you are the main event planner, how can you prepare these people so they're not bothering you all of the time so you can continue doing your job?
That's a great question, Karen. I feel like I've recently been doing a couple events where I was in charge of registration specifically. So that's the example that's coming to mind. But walking through your event staff through what a normal flow of whatever they're responsible for looks like, and then calling out those moments when maybe it is a moment where you want them to, do something different. I think my pep talk, I always give my reg team, and I actually give it, I think, to almost all event staff. Mary, you can keep me honest on this, but usually I'll make a point to say that folks, when they come to your event, they're usually bringing the energy that they got from somewhere else, and they'll come in flustered. Maybe they're running late. Maybe they had, something else was happening, but they're going to show up and all of a sudden frustrated or flustered with you. And I just emphasize to staff, it's often not what we're doing. That person's coming into our space and bringing that energy with them. And so don't let their energy rush your process. So I'd rather folks take that extra 5-10 seconds to take a breath, make sure they're following the process we had to check that person in, than to mirror that exact frustration or hurriedness back at the attendee and skip a really important step for us. So that's like, I always say that I'd rather you take the extra 5-10 seconds, don't feel rushed, and do it the right way. And then for like a registrations one where we know there's going to be attendees who didn't sign up, or their name's spelled wrong on their badge, or they thought they could just walk in and show up. And so the way we just triage that was I had most of my folks were volunteers that I would just make sure they know they do the normal process. Anyone who is abnormal does not fall in that category. If I check them in, I grab their badge, here you go. They got sent to me. I just immediately, and I said, and I was I called myself the trouble table. We never said that to attendees. I said, the verbiage you use is just say, my colleague Logan at the end can help you. And they would just do that. And that just constantly, it helped them know that if there was anyone complicated, I wasn't putting that on them. They were just getting triaged to me. And so making that really clear. I've also made like FAQ docs. I think I saw someone here said they have kind of a contingency plan, but it's an internal guide for staff. I would, if you have external staff that you're working with, make an external friendly guide, whether that's FAQs, like where's the bathroom? Do we have a coat check? Can I leave the event and come back in? Like some of these things that maybe you've given attendees, I found sometimes event organizers forget their staff needs that as well, because the more informed everybody is, the better. So I'll often have packets for my staff, and it's not so much that I request they read it and they memorize it. It's more like, if this question comes up, check this first. If you still have questions, that's when you call me. Or I give them scenarios where if this person comes in, you're calling me because I'll come and handle it. Mary, what do you have to add?
Add on to it just a little bit. I think what you said was great. Just that when you're training these staff, tell them calm is contagious, right? Great phrase for events.
I like that.
Yeah. Set expectations with the staff and then give them like communications, kind of like Logan was saying, so that they can call you or whoever if they like really need help. And then something that I also use is something called an incident action plan. And it's like this paper that I give everybody who's involved that says like the lines of communication. If something like really goes wrong, and then it has like, 911 or like the non-emergency police line number on there and things like that. And just telling them like, you're empowered to deal with this if it's an emergency, whoever you are. And here's like some stuff that can help you. So really giving them the resources, and kind of training them on how to react in that way. But I echo what Logan said.
That's awesome. It's like having the really important phone numbers on the refrigerator, but just everyone having it at their hand whenever they need it. We are getting a bunch of questions coming in. Let's see, let's answer a few of them. Let's see, there's one here I'm going to save for later because we'll touch on that in a bit. Henry here asked us, let's talk about some budgets. How do you balance contingency with the client's budget?
Mary, I'll let you tackle this one first.
I mean, this is challenging, Henry. Good question. I would say that sometimes you kind of have to convince them, because let's say we're talking about like weather backup plans. Logan and I live in Seattle, so like we're always preparing for rain no matter what time of year it is, I feel like. And so sometimes there's like this conversation that I have to have with clients, and we're like, are we going to get a tent? Do we need tent walls? Like, because that, especially when you're like really mindful of your budget, those things add up. Do you need heaters or like fans or all of these things? And a lot of times, I'll be honest, we get them and we end up not using them. Like, thank goodness, because we don't need them. But if we did, at least we had them. So there's this weird conversation I think that has to take place that's like acknowledging that we might spend money on this and not use it. But that's the point, is that we have it if we need it, and it's important. And I think with anything contingency plan related, especially like the questions about how do you get other people on board with this idea, the moment that those people experience an event when something goes wrong, the next year, they're probably going to be way more on board with these contingency plans, which is unfortunate, right? That it has to like take that. But as soon as they're a part of something that goes wrong, next time they're going to be like, oh yeah, we don't want that happening again. So yeah, we're going to spend the money this time or something like that. And so that's sort of hard sometimes, that people just have to learn the hard way. But with budgeting, I think you can really advocate for how it will help if you end up needing it, and then just to expect that up front, like make it a line item, don't make it a surprise item. But Logan, what would you add?
Yeah, I think for contingency plans, it is hard, especially if you're at an organization or run an event where the numbers really are the key metric for success, like how much money you make. So why would you spend money on something maybe you're not going to use? I would take the approach that I do with even my own event proposals, is kind of giving people like a low, medium, high of different options of how to be super prepared, and understanding what those costs are, associated with. I know we all went through COVID, and as events came back, a lot of people had COVID plans, and that could be as robust as mandatory daily testing with COVID officers and people who were in charge of just testing, to, I think I saw in the chat, someone said just like masks and hand sanitizer. And those are very different, budgets that you need. And it depends on your organization's goals, their values, what they know their audience the most of kind of where that goes, or, what's going to be the best fit for their event. And I have clients like on the production side is what I do a lot of work on in as well. And I'll have production budgets that are $1 million. I'll also have production budgets that $5,000, and the backup plans for those very different budgets are not going to be the same. Like my $1 million client can afford to have a backup Wi-Fi connection or a hard line dropped as a backup for live streaming. That's going to cost you, $50,000, $60,000 versus my $5,000 client's going to be like, we'll just have another Zoom link. Or if that doesn't work, we have an email drafted saying we're recording it and we will provide, the recording after the event. And those are both, freer or lower cost options. So I think just figuring out what works for you. My big advice for you, Henry, or anybody else on budget is don't be afraid though to voice these concerns, and at least, get it in email or in a call. Like Mary and I sometimes are in roles where we can't be the final call on if the end event organizer takes our advice to go yes or no with this contingency plan. But I often find solace of not to have like an I told you so moment, but just I said it. So now, I came with that expertise and I was prepared to help you do that plan. But at the end of the day, ultimately you chose to do something else and we had to come up with a different plan. So just making sure that you are still voicing those concerns, because I really think it's just very, very important.
That's such a great idea, just giving the clients options as well, so they can do what they're comfortable with, but still have some type of plan in place. I'm going to skip around here on our questions a little bit because Mary, you had started to mention about weather. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about what would be a good game plan to have when Mother Nature decides to strike and throws a curveball at your events. How can you tackle those types of weather issues, natural disaster issues?
I mean, these are hard I think we can speak a little bit to weather, and then we kind of have another resource to give you for natural disasters and things like that. But yeah, I am really, really inclined to like be the person that is always renting tents and tent walls, like no matter what. And so we'll always have those, and we'll usually have those set up, especially if it's an outdoor event, obviously is what we're talking about. If it's indoors, your problems are way less, but it really depends on where you live. Like, cause maybe an issue might end up being something like, I don't know, extreme heat, or I know sometimes around here we have like a lot of smoke and there are advisories for that. And if you have an outdoor event, you do have to be aware of things like that. And so I think a lot of it is like pay attention. I'm so surprised there's sometimes when I'm like, oh, there's like a smoke advisory happening right now. I didn't even know that. Like just look at your weather app and be prepared for what may come. I will say for disasters, that is a big conversation. There is someone, I'll put her link in the chat to her LinkedIn, but she really specializes in like disaster preparedness for events. And there's like a lot of like legalities and things like that behind it. And so I don't know, Logan, I'll let you chime in. I don't know how fully we can speak to that, but we'll at least give you a resource where y'all can learn more about it.
Yeah, I mean, weather's the big one. And having all those emergency numbers. I think someone I saw in the chat here said, having to deal with a medical emergency. There are certain size events that I would just say, as you get into the hundreds of people, you should probably have a medical professional EMT team on site. If you again I have a lot of context from sports. So at sporting events, you actually they have an ambulance and actual EMTs on site ready to help escalate anything that like the on-field trainers, need. And that's something I've seen my corporate clients will have an EMT. So if you're someone who does the space plan for a conference, figuring out what rooms, make sure you have a room for the EMT. I feel like I used it at an event a month ago where it wasn't necessarily an emergency, but we had one of our actual event staff people was having like their eyes were really irritated and we think it was allergies, but we were happy to be able to, we all had the number for the on-site EMT team just to give them a look. They took them to urgent care, gave them some meds, but it was like, we just felt you feel better having planned for those things. And if it helps when putting in context for stakeholders, like folks who are approving your budget, just to go back, because some of these weather and natural disasters can feel kind of doomsday-y when you're explaining them, like having a concrete example of, hey, if this happened, what would you want us to do? Or if we had the EMT on site, they're able to do it immediately versus us having to call an ambulance that comes to the front of the hotel or venue or whatever and has to cart the person out. Like there's ways to handle it a little bit better because you have those contingencies in place. Another tactic that I'll take is also just having a little bit of contingency in your event budget. So maybe you don't specifically know you want to rent the tent, or you don't know if you necessarily need it for COVID supplies, especially I've seen organizers kind of moving away from that, but having like a little bit of money that you can apply to whatever is more applicable as you get closer to your actual event day. I did this with an event. I used to live in China and do events in Shanghai. And I did a nonprofit event that we booked a rooftop that we were thinking, it was October. It's kind of similar to Shanghai or Seattle, where it's very touch or go. And we were like, it's a rooftop, there's some covered area. So if it rains, we're fine. None of us clocked that like we would have the coldest October ever. And we got to 2 days before the event, and it was going to be like 40 degrees outside, freezing. And so we had to make the call very last minute to allocate budget to having heaters, because we said, at least we need to, have something that looks like we were aware of how cold it was on this rooftop. And that was a game changer, because we ended up having folks who then did stay out on this rooftop versus, leaving the event or having a completely negative experience. But that was a cost, and that took away from our overall margins for the event. But we knew we'd have people just leave because it would be way too cold. So you might not have to define it now, but at least earmarking some funds to be able to tackle that weather, those things we can't control as planners who love to control things. We can't control the weather, and making sure that you're then prepared and know the costs, maybe just getting the quotes for a tent versus actually booking the tent, the cost, and knowing, hey, if I call you 3 days before my event, will you have inventory? And maybe they'll say, no, you have to make that call a month out. So just doing those steps ahead of time will help you in the moment if you have to react to some of these natural disasters and things that you can. And natural disasters, I guess COVID was a big one for a lot of people, knowing your cancellation plan. Like, what are your cancellation clauses in your contracts? Can you reschedule? What is that cost implication of that? I know a lot of us as event pros got very aware of cancellation terms or rescheduling terms because of COVID. And that's something I hope we carry forward, because again, I know we're having more hurricanes on the East Coast and things like that. They're impacting attendee travel, just knowing how you're going to react to some of that. And Mary's resource knows a lot more of the legality side of it, but I just, as a planner, I'm like, you should at least talk through it and know kind of how we would tackle those things.
Absolutely. Another question we just got in from Jessica, asking, how do you plan your contingency for any personal issues if you're sick during your event? How do you manage yourself and the event when sickness may hit you?
Ooh, good
Nothing,
question.
yeah, nothing like feeling under the weather and planning a couple thousand-person event.
Yeah, this is the question, Jessica, that keeps me up at night. Thanks for asking it. Yeah, I think that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure. This is where I think having event partners is so important. We talk about this a lot. If you've listened to Logan and I talk before, which you have, Jessica, we really rely on each other, and then also like our colleagues as well for when things like this happen. I know Logan may or may not have an example of when we've had to kind of back each other up because of something like this. And so having someone, or at least I would say a group of people that you can call when you need them because something like this happens, is key. Heaven forbid if something like terrible happened and you're unable to make those plans, I think that's kind of a different situation. Sometimes I've thought maybe in my contracts I should or give a backup person that's already in there, because I have a clause about like finding a suitable replacement, but maybe I need to give a phone number as well, like they can call somebody else. But I think, yeah, really making connections with people in the industry. This is where we can support each other. We're all about community over competition. We talk about that a lot. I think that there's ways that we can all come together to help each other, especially for things like this, because we're human and we are going to get sick or something is going to happen. And so you're right. We need to be prepared.
Yeah, I think to echo Mary's of making sure you have somebody who could step into your role if you need to, which maybe goes back to first making sure like all of your key event documents are all in one place, and somebody else other than you has access to those links. So I feel like I make a joke sometimes. I'm like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, here's all the documentation. And I've said that to some teams, and I joke because I don't want to get hit by a bus, but it is one, like if you got sick, or Mary's alluding to, I had a situation where I was running a webinar. It was in the evening time. I had a very early morning, like 5 a.m. flight, and had a travel day that was for all travel days. I've never had such bad kind of delays. We then were in the air too long, so we got diverted to another airport that then canceled all flights except our flight. And it turns out I was going to miss my webinar time. And so luckily I had Mary to call and a couple other folks. And I called my client and, profusely apologized for again, something that I didn't think was going to go wrong. And my contingency plan now is I will never fly on the same day as a virtual event or anything, purely because I now have that anecdote. But making sure you have people that you can call to back you up. And then I also will say, if it happens to you, like clients know we're human, event organizers, your colleagues know we're human. Like it's very unreasonable to expect that you're never going to get sick. So don't beat yourself up too much if you do, and kind of, look at your contract. Or I would always, figure out if they had to bring in someone last minute, it's like, what's a fair compensation for yourself still? Because you still held that event day. You didn't control that you got sick. And, making sure that they can cover the person who had to actually execute your role. And then a little bit to get ahead of this, because with my sporting events, I do a lot of multi-week events, like 2-3 week. They're kind of marathons, I call them, because then when I have to do a one-day event afterward, I feel like I'm not a runner, but I feel like that's how marathon runners feel when they do a 5K, is I actually have a self-care kit that I take with me on the road. So just like you have your toiletry kit with your shampoo, your conditioner, anything else you need, I also have a self-care kit of like things that keep my body feeling good and relaxed and able to like decompress after a long event day. And that's something I bring with me now on the road. And that has been really helpful with just keeping me like physically feeling like I'm up for the task of doing a 2-3 week long event. And that's something, even if you have a 3-day event, it could be really helpful.
So important. Take care of yourself, because it's hard to take care of others and events and all the millions of tasks you have to do if you're not taking care of yourself. And I know that's something that probably slips the minds of most people here, because planners usually plan for everything except thinking about themselves. But definitely a good tip there. So, a question that I know a lot of people are interested in, because unfortunately I've seen this happen myself at multiple events. What do you do when a speaker goes MIA? So, I mean, this can be anything from they just don't show up, which I've personally had happen to me, or I've had before at an event where you saw the speaker, they're there, you tell them to go to AV to get wired, and then they disappear. What do you do?
The show must go on. Logan, what would you say?
I mean, this is one that I would have hoped you would have talked through this scenario with your organizer. If you're not the one who can make that call, or you've figured out, can you shift things around? Because that's my question in that moment. If this was live, I had no idea. I'd be asking whether it was me making that call, or if it's usually like the lead client, it goes, are we just going to skip them and we move on to the next thing, or whatever next thing is ready? If that's our MC jumping on stage and stalling till the next speaker's ready, or do we delay? Or do we take an unexpected, we take a quick, hey, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break while you figure out who that person is or where that person went. But ideally, you've talked through some of that, because I have said that's not like a universal, like certain VIP speakers. It's like, if the CEO is missing, we will hold, we will wait, we will ask our host just to, keep elongating, versus if it was, maybe a speaker that would just, you were doing them a favor and giving them a 2-minute speaking slot and they're MIA, and you've tried everywhere to mix them, to find them and they're nowhere to be found. To this point, a backup plan / just I think we talk about on our podcast a lot, also like communication plans. I think we didn't touch on it earlier at the top of this, but also having like a on-site comms plan. How do you talk to your team? I'm a big fan of headsets, walkie-talkies, radios, because you can get instant, does anyone have eyes on speaker A? Anybody? And anyone on headset, would it be able to do that? Versus if you text, you have no way of knowing if your team is actively looking at their phone all the time, or, they're maybe typing back to you. I think the worst are those 3 bubbles you can see. I had an event where we were texting to show call, and that was very difficult because I couldn't tell if they'd forgotten about me or if they were giving me a direction to send the speaker on stage. So having that kind of instant communication, simple walkie-talkies, is going to make all the difference, because you can very quickly react to that situation and have people say, yes, I heard you. No, I didn't. No, I don't see them, versus trying to individually call everybody on your team to figure out where that speaker is.
I have kind of an example for this too. And Logan, in the chat, take a look and give some of your recs, because we know that you have headset recommendations. So we had a headliner for a recent event, and the unfortunate part of this is that, like, I wouldn't say that he went MIA, because we heard that day that he maybe wasn't going to come, so we had like a little bit of time to prepare. But it was like a really big red flag and issue, because he was like the headliner for it. We used him in the marketing and communications. Like, that is how we sold tickets, is by saying he was going to be there. And so it was like a huge whoopsie. Actually, that was a lesson learned, I think, for people, that wouldn't happen again. We would try to not headline them in that way. But basically, so I think the key thing here is, like, people are people. He had a family like emergency thing that he was dealing with, and so he is human. VIPs are still human, and so he just maybe wasn't going to be up to coming. And so we kind of, everybody that was involved was kind of scrambling to try to restructure the program, so like that attendees weren't going to be disappointed, and maybe trying to like compensate a little bit. and have someone who was also a really good performer. They were instead just going to end the night out instead of the headliner. Maybe people would be kind of disappointed, but he would still do a really good job. And so they would in the end be pleased. But like there's all this like speculation kind of that was happening. But I will say that like thankfully it ended up being okay because he did come and he performed and did the things that he was going to do, and it ended up being a great night. People said it was like the best thing ever. But I'd say a huge lesson learned is when working with headliners and VIPs or somebody that could go MIA like that is just like not like acknowledging it, like sorry, yes, acknowledging it, but not necessarily using like those people's names as much in every event marketing communication thing, because something could go wrong like that.
So we just talked a bit about what you do kind of to fill a program or repurpose it when someone's missing. What about the reverse there? What would you do if your program's running over in time? How do you what do you do? Do people stick around? Do you cut something? How does that work?
This is a hard one, Cassie, because I feel like it's a common problem. And I always try to emphasize to clients when we're planning out the program and the timing is you want to get as close to whatever scheduled communicated time, you want to get as close to that as possible. And no one's upset when you end early. They're usually annoyed if you're going over. And so, yeah, trying to figure out where you can cut time. If it's my choice, I mean, we would be quickly trying to get that speaker to wrap up or cut the Q&A, or, if your closing was 15, now we're shortening it to 2 minutes. But kind of a key contingency backup plan is I'll talk through that scenario ahead of time. And one thing, I had one client who I think was putting aspirational timing in our run a show for how much they wanted the speaker to talk for. And I had to talk to them and say, no, we want the real time. Like if this speaker is going to talk for 10 minutes, don't put 6. So we think we're, just put 10 because we know they're going to speak for 10. We can use a speaker timer is a great tool that we could set for 6 minutes to try to telegraph to that speaker that they need to be faster, but we still in the actual runtime so that you can communicate the end of the event effectively. You need the real runtime. So that's the hard part. If you're running late, it's also important here to have talked about like, what does that impact if your event is running over? I found budget has been the best way to get clients to wrap things up. Like if you say, hey, if we go 15 more minutes, our production team goes into overtime, that's going to cost $5,000, which it sounds a lot, but I'm just making up numbers here. But sometimes it is. It's like 15 more minutes could be $5,000. That will usually incentivize someone to be like, we need to wrap it. I will physically go up and walk there and stand there until the guy recognizes that I'm saying, or the ma'am to like wrap it up. Or maybe you have a transportation company that you go, if we keep pushing it 30 more minutes, they have to release 2 of their drivers and we have less shuttles to get people where they need to go, or, whatever those implications are. If it's not necessarily a show or like a program on stage and it's more people don't want to leave your happy hour or your food and beverage. I mean, you close the bars, you start to turn the lights on, you play some closing time music, or I just heard from an event last week, they started playing, I think, the Ariel soundtrack to try to get people out of there because they'd asked them nicely a couple times and the building security was like, they were having the same thing. We'd be in overtime if we stay 15 more minutes. So I think you can talk through how overt you want to be with that timing, but my first instinct would always be to try to just signal to the speaker themselves on stage or cutting off the bar, whatever it is, the more subtle signs, and then just have to get more overt if needed.
And it looks like Shauna in our chat just suggested having speaker timers. That's definitely a great idea if you are able to budget for that.
Oh, yeah.
So we are getting a bunch of questions in the Q&A. So let's hit up a couple of those. Kind of stepping back to the last question, Sonia asked about a little more about walkie-talkies and communicating with the event team. Is that something that is better for the event organizer to set up on their own and bring, or to let the AV handle?
Logan, you can take that.
Yeah, I think you can never have too many walkie-talkies. It might be a separate system. So maybe if Sonia, if your question is you're not a part of the AV team, I would say you also want walkie-talkies for your team. Like if the logistics, check-in, that kind of stuff have their own walkie-talkie channel that they're on, and then the AV team has their own channel that they're on. I think it's just so helpful. It's instantaneous. That kind of falls back to our earlier question we got, though. Then I make sure you train your staff on how to properly use a walkie-talkie and know what is a walkie-talkie conversation and what's maybe they just should talk to their colleagues side by side, or what's a phone call. But I have like, there's ones you can get on Amazon for a set of 6. My partner's opening an event venue, and we have a set of 6 walkie-talkies with earpieces that we use just because the questions are like, has anyone seen the groom? Or, does anyone have extra chairs somewhere? And that's so much easier on walkie-talkie to 6 people. Another one, I put it in the chat, but Unity is another great app that I use, and they let you pay a per event fee. So if you're working for a company that maybe you don't have a big budget for walkie-talkies, you have to utilize your phone. So the only downer is if you take a phone call, it will disconnect you from the app. You'll just have to get back on once you end your phone call. But that's a really easy way. It's like $50 for an event. You can have up to, I think, 5 or 6 people on it, and then just use headphones to be able to talk during your event. So that's a big one. But yeah, I would make sure you've talked through how you're going to get a hold of folks. And I wouldn't put my end client usually on it, but like my team, Mary knows, I feel like almost any event I run, we always have either walkie-talkies or the Unity app. But Mary, what do you want to add to that?
I think you covered it. I am going to ask, and if anyone has ever used if you have an Apple Watch and they have that walkie-talkie feature, shout out to Caitlin who's here. Her and I have tried to use it. Sometimes we're like, I don't know if it's really going to work. If anyone has used that successfully in an event, please let me know. That's just a question that I've had lately.
Like an Apple Watch?
Yeah, there's like a walkie-talkie.
I didn't even know you can do that.
Yes, but I'm not saying it works for events. I don't really know how to make it work, but yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. So we're just talking a bit about, specific communication, walkie-talkies, headsets, but around the topic of communication, how do you communicate with your client, boss, the organization post-event if something went wrong? What is the plan there?
I mean, this is one that we talk about. I think we started at the top where I'm like, I feel empowered when things go wrong because we get to show off, our skills as event pros. But this is the part that I don't love about, then you have to address, what happened. So the big thing that I do, if anything goes not according to plan, whether my backup plan worked or didn't work, is I try to take notes. Like on my actual event documents, I'm a physical clipboard, pen and paper girly. So I will like write down, even if it's, again, registration examples are popping up for me of, why I let someone in, or this person said so-and-so told them to come, and this person told me, yes, please let them in. I will write that down. All of those names, the name of the person I let in, who said they sent them, and the person from the event staff who said, yes, Logan, let them in. So I have that. Should that come up again, I know I'm like, here's what happened, because so many things kind of blur. And just kind of making note of like where we started running late. And did I tell them like, hey, this is why we're running late? And they said, no, keep going. So if that comes back up and someone tries to, again, say something if it's on our end, but I also always do a post-event report, which I think we're going to include the link in an email after this. But this is like my secret sauce to how I plan events is this post-event report. And it is a table that really lays out like what happened. And I break it down. You can break it as specific by each event, individual event area, or just like pre-planning and event day, budget. And I'll write down what happened. And then I have a column that's what I would do differently or looking ahead to next year. And this is where I'm writing down suggestions. And so this is really helpful if you have an annual event that repeats, because you can then see, and this is something I'd include when talking to the client or someone, if something went wrong, that I'm like, well, we've made note of it. So for next year, yes, we're going to get the tent, or next year, yes, we'll have a backup link for our live stream. And like walking them through exactly what happened and why we reacted, because I'm not going to say I always get it right, but I always have a reasoning behind why I chose that option. And so, yeah, I'll make notes of that. And that's in my post-event report. And it's so helpful for the next year, when I'm planning my personal budgets, when I'm helping the client with their budgets or their event plan, going back to that post-event report and be like, oh yeah, I needed to ask for 3 more chairs in the back of the room because I had people standing at my tech table and that was cumbersome for people getting around. Or I had like crew, we had people who were vegetarian, and for the crew meal, they had forgotten to have some vegetarian friendly options. And like little notes that you're not going to remember, to as big as some of these larger backup plans of things you wish you had if you could repeat it. And I go back to these all the time, whether it's for the same repeat event or if I have a similar event come across my desk, I'll go to that post-event report from that previous event and be like, oh yeah, I forgot that I needed walkie-talkies. I forgot that, and I'm not going to pay for those. I'm going to need the client to pay for those. So we need those walkie-talkies. So those are so helpful for just keeping me honest. And then I think my last piece, we talked about it as an organizer, you want to admit when things are wrong, but as a planner or an individual, you should admit when things go wrong. You're not pointing fingers at people, but just saying, here's a scenario, here's how we reacted and why. But moving forward, maybe I would do it differently, or I would do it exactly the same as I did, but admitting that maybe this wasn't how you needed to handle it. Mary, what do you want to add there?
I think what you said at the end is really key when you're doing having these types of conversations is people really just want to know, well, what are you going to do next time? Like, was there a lesson learned and what are you going to do about it? So not just, acknowledging it, but also saying, we're going to do this next time differently. And here's what we're going to do. So I love that you said that.
I've also one more, because we've talked money, would be also if it applies to you offering a discount, if it really was something that was in your control and you dropped the ball on, or a plan just really went awry. I've done that, like in this scenario where I had to have Mary step in for me to help run a webinar. I created a more stressful situation based on something I was responsible for myself being there for the event. And so that was like a scenario where I did offer a financial discount, just because, again, I was trying to figure out ways to help mitigate that stress that I caused. So I'm not an advocate for discounts all the time, but it is helpful to ask, or if you've had a vendor who has led you astray with expectations, told you they had a backup plan, they didn't, that is also a case to, again, ask for maybe discount on their services.
Great information. I love for sure the post-event kind of recap for yourself, helping yourself out in the future. I feel I often thank myself. I'm like, thank you, past Cassie, for doing something that I was about to get stressed out about. So it's a very good way to help yourself for the future. Okay, so we are getting a bunch more questions in and we are under 10 minutes now. So I think we'll have time for about 2 more questions. One that was asked earlier was about what are the key differences in contingency plans if you're planning for in-person versus virtual? Is there any, like, I'm sure they're all different, but is there any big main key points there?
I think there's a lot of similarities, really, truly. And Logan and I have had to deal with quite a few, I would say. A lot of them tech related, and sometimes it's really hard to mitigate because it's out of your control. Logan, maybe we can share a couple examples, and you can. I know they're both of ours, so you can share them.
Yeah, for our contingency plans for virtual. Well, you say they're the same, Mary. I do think there's like less virtually, because you don't have to account so much for like the attendee physical journey. We've talked about EMTs or natural disasters, like that's less on your plate virtually. But as a planner, and that's maybe some of you guys, and please put in the chat if you do, but you might viscerally dislike virtual events. Unfortunately, you're talking to someone who loves virtual events. I also love in person, but I think there's a lot of benefits like this, where we're all getting to interact virtually that maybe we all physically couldn't have gone to the same place at one time together. So I like virtual, but there's a lot of things that we can't physically see and fix. Like we see a long line at registration in person. We know we can throw some bodies at it, help organize people, maybe open up more check-in stations. Virtually, if you're at a Zoom and no one joins, you can't tell where it went wrong, but maybe it was you sent the wrong link to everybody. So the contingency plans usually a lot are around the technology not working. So having a backup link. I do this when I do Vimeo streams, YouTube streams, Zoom, whatever it is, I'll have a backup link set up. And then internet. You live and die by your internet in virtual. So that's your internet as the event host or whoever is actually streaming for you, but also your speaker's internet. I know for like this webinar, we've got a group chat going just in case if this Zoom link went down, we have a quick way to talk the 3 of us here on screen to, spin something else up. And having maybe your speakers have their phone is ready to join. They have the event link there. They're ready to join in. So it's a little bit more, you have to really anticipate and extra communicate virtually since we physically can't be there to help troubleshoot and get people kind of in the right, space. Or if your attendees are lost virtually, it's again, sending email communications versus physical signage and physical things. So virtual, it's really your internet and your backup links to things. Mary, is there anything else I'm missing for key differences?
No, I think that you just covered it. Yeah, there's one example where we had a server catch on fire in New Jersey for a virtual event, and you just like can't. That's just one of those crazy things where it's like, how do you even deal with something like that? Which we were kind of able to, but
it taught me
virtual events.
It taught me why we needed that email to be drafted to send out. And just to paint the picture, it was certain pages. If you refreshed your page, you couldn't get back into the event. But if you didn't touch anything, you were oblivious. You didn't know that the event wasn't working. So we'd started getting emails coming in saying people were having trouble joining, and half our team was fine and half our team had hit refresh or gone to a different page. And we found out it was because of servers in New Jersey. And it took about an hour or two to troubleshoot, but lots of templated emails that we started to create to send to attendees to, thank them for their patience and let them know we'd be back at it. And post event that had a lot of attendees also saying, oh, we didn't notice anything because they didn't touch a different page. They were just watching the stream. So the things you can't control. But yes, I do ask now platforms if they've had any platform crashes, how quick their response time is, who do I contact if I'm having platform issues. And that's something like Zoom doesn't really necessarily have live support at the very basic level that you can talk to, but any other paid platform you do, just making sure. And I'm sure Expo Pass has amazing customer support, because that's all things like as a planner, you want to talk through those scenarios of like, what do I do if this happens?
Absolutely. And yes, we do have great customer support. Just throwing that out there. Our team is awesome. You guys should all meet them sometime. But on that note, we are running out of time here, and we don't want to be the people going over and having to figure out a contingency plan for that. So I'm just going to ask you, Logan and Mary, one last question. If you had one thing to share with all of our planners here, what's the most important thing that you would tell them to implement into your event's contingency plan?
I would say safety, something safety related. I think like if a speaker doesn't show up, the show must go on. But if someone like gets injured at your event, that's like real life. And that is, I would say, more important than the event itself. And it's something that as the manager of this gathering has to, take some responsibility for and have a plan. And so I would say if I'm choosing one thing, I'm going to choose safety and making it like an incident action plan or something, so you know how to deal with those real emergencies.
I feel like I want to take the easy route of just that you have to have a backup plan because it is so, and mine are just, they look so different depending on the role that I'm taking at an event. But like you can get as minute to breaking down your role at your event into the smallest of things of backup of, making sure you have a backup plan for that specific thing going wrong, or as broad as just like Mary saying, like safety or overall, event thing. There's also just as a planner learning that there's going to be things at your event that I call it a you thing. It's like only event organizers would notice it. The attendees don't notice it. And, then you just kind of have to let that go. But anything that is like attendee related, attendee facing, I feel like those are the ones you want to prioritize if you're not able to make a backup plan for every single thing. But please do talk about it. I know we had a question here, I think, about talking about how do you handle pushback on it. It's just advocate for like, no, we need to talk through this scenario, not because it's going to happen, but because we need to make sure that we're all ready to react when it does, or if it does, not when, maybe that's even more doomsday, but if it does. So have those conversations, document it, write it down so that, if this happens, then I will do this. Because it's just future you will thank you so much, so much.
Amazing. Well, that was so much great information. Thank you both so much for sharing with us. I think we've all learned here some of the great takeaways that I know I have now are just plan, communicate, document everything, and that will help you plan for success. Thank you for everyone who attended today. I know